One of the stories that you may have heard me share before is about Avraham Dov of Ostrich, who was a Hasidic leader who left Eastern Europe in the late 1700s and moved to the Holy Land. When he arrived, he said, I expected to see hills of gold and streets paved with jewels. What I found was a dusty city, Jerusalem. And he wondered if he'd made a mistake of moving to the land. So the years went by. Then many years later, one day he woke up and he had a great feast and he invited all of his friends. And he said, today I woke up and I realized that the hills really are made of gold and the streets are paved with jewels, if only you have the eyes to see them. And this is part of our tradition. We're always walking, we're always trying to find the Israel that we believe in, the Israel that we cherish, the Israel that's in our hearts. And what a parsha. We have the beginning of that connection with the commandment to Abraham, go forth from your land, go from your father's house to the land that I will show you. Last Tuesday night, my father went to the post-election talk at Hartman's Institute between Rabbi Doniel Hartman and Yossi Klein Halevi. It was right after the first exit polls for the election were coming out. And Doniel Hartman and Hartman itself, probably the leading such Jewish think tank, spent countless years trying to create connections between Israel and the Jewish diaspora, specifically the North American communities, and has spent much time trying to promote an enlightened Zionism as well. My father said he could see Doniel Hartman was nearly in tears, and he said, we failed. And Yossi Klein Halevi, we said that, well, now we're about to have a government, still probable, but most likely, that will be probably the furthest from the ideals and values of most American Jews, and there's maybe ever been, for the issues that are important politically to American Jews. And he also said that it's imperative as we go forward, as we try and find our place within it, to ally ourselves with those who have the greatest chance, the center of making a difference. And so since Abraham, we've been walking to Israel. So when Abraham arrives, just a few lines after he receives the commandment in the Torah, and he arrives for the first time in the land of Israel, it's not a built-up land, and it's not welcoming. Haknani az ba'aretz. The Canaanites were in the land, and he pitches his tent, and before him lays the land of God's vision, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And he builds an altar to God, and he invokes God by name. And the Zohar says that Abraham already had a sense of the beauty of this land. And Rashi says, well, why did he build an altar? Why at this moment did he build an altar? And Rashi, our medieval French commentator, who brings all of our received tradition, who exemplifies the oral tradition, says, well, Abraham had the gift of prophecy, and he could already see that that place where he was pitching his tent, his descendants would stumble, and he was starting to pray for them already because they would stumble in the book of Joshua so many hundreds of years later. And he'd just arrived on the land, but he was already praying for those who would come later, that they wouldn't stumble and that they would be okay and they would survive through all of it. And so Abraham never stopped praying through his whole lifetime. He fled to Egypt. We saw that story this morning when there was a famine. He waged war, his flocks grew. And we also see his character in the time when he offers the first choice lands to Lot. Because the land could not support both of them together, for their possessions were so great they could not remain together. And so Abraham, before he's Abraham, says to Lot, let there be no strife between you and me, between my herders and yours, for we are kin. Is not the whole land before you? Let us separate. If you go north, I will go south. If you go south, I will go north. And so Lot chose himself the whole plain of the Jordan, the best lands. And Lot journeyed eastward, and thus they parted from each other. And right at that moment, seeing Abraham's action, God says to Abraham, right after Lot had departed from him, "Raise your eyes and look out from where you are, to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west, for I give you the land that you see and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, then your offspring too shall be counted. Up, walk about the land, through its length and its breadth, for I give it to you. Walk about the land, through its length and its breadth." And so Abraham was to bind himself, he was to walk it, he was to know it. And Abraham would keep praying, and God would keep a promise. And so Abraham pitches his tent near the terebims of Mamre near Hebron. And I remember as a child traveling through the land of Israel, growing up there. I remember going to the north and the kibbutzim where we would spend weekends, and the time my hand got full of thorns from falling on a cactus. I remember going to Nebi Shmuel, the burial place of the prophet Samuel, where we would gather with friends, or Ein Gedi, the oasis in the hills, the Judean hills. I remember being full of the music of old Israel. Yonatan Hakatan, Sivivon Sof Sof Sof, and all the beauty of the Israel that was just a few decades before, the kibbutzim, of all the high values and ideals that came from that time. And now that I'm trying to give to my own children, we're standing at the Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Day at school assembly, fulfilled, taking in the courage of those who were in the Shoah, and visiting my father in the army, and my pride for him. The beautiful Israel, Jerusalem of gold, and of copper, and of light. And so, Abraham and God's vision was a long vision. And their commitment was not for a year or two, but their commitment was for a lifetime, for their families, and for thousands of years. A vision. And the hills are gold, but sometimes of dust at different times. What we can do in moments of change, keep walking the breadth and the length, finding new ways to see and to act, make our voices be heard, and keep praying and holding on to the parts of the land that ring true in our own hearts, and knowing that our ancestors are praying for us too, and knowing that it's bigger than any of us, and yet we can all find those eyes of gold. And in that seminal song, Al Kol Ele, written by Naomi Shemer to her sister, I believe, after her sister experienced loss, Ala Oket ve'al Hadvash, the one takes the stinger of the bee and the honey, all of it, Al Hadvash ve'al Makor, Al Amar ve'al Matok, you take the bitter and the sweet, and please do not uproot us. Don't forget the hope. So we keep walking the land, we keep holding on to the hope, take all of it, and we do what we each can. Shabbat Shalom.